think so.
Good to see you this morning.
Well, there's more chairs.
Beautiful morning. Sheila and I were enjoying all of the bright colored trees coming out there. When the sun hits them, ow. But enjoy them because after tomorrow, all the rain will probably be on the ground, right? Without rain. We'll take the rain. Well, it's good to see all of you out this morning. We're at a little treat today. And so we're glad that you were able to be with us. And we met these folks one day this week, Thursday, Friday, and had lunch and just a great time. It was a joy to meet them. How many already knew them? I know, the back corner has. Some of our folks. Yeah, okay, great. Well, it was a pleasure meeting them. And Joel had to find a hometown girl from Redding, California to marry. So, and that's what he did. And we're glad. We don't support them right now, but I'm going to put a little plug in there for down the road. And doing a great job in Ukraine. I guess a place I wouldn't want to be right now would be Ukraine. Sorry, y'all, but the Lord hasn't called me there. So, and I often say the safest place to be in the world is where God calls you to be. That can be right in the midst of anything, right? So, good. Joe and Loriann, we're glad to have you today. And I'm going to have prayer and then turn it right over to you. Father, for the beautiful day, we thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And for our missionary friends, Father, we thank you that they could be here and join us and share with what you're doing in another part of the world. And we are so excited. I pray that you bless our time and encourage our hearts for the service to follow. I pray that you would have your perfect will and way in each heart and life that comes. In Jesus' name. Amen.
It's good to be here this morning with you all. Thank you for opening up your church to us, to inviting us. We came home. Just a brief introduction. My name is Joel Matchak. This is my wife Loriann. She's from Redding. I'm from the Lodi, Stockton area of California, just about 50 minutes south of Sacramento. I grew up on a little farm. I'm one of 9 children from a small family, 9 children. I have 1 sister and 7 brothers. So the boys were the majority. My sister ruled the home. My sister is the oldest, and so she's the princess. She's the queen. Many people said, "Oh, poor Sarah. She was the you're the only girl," and us boys were like, "She's like the princess. She has her own room. She never has to wear hand-me-downs. She had it all, according to us." She was also our second mother, because she really helped Mom a lot. But I grew up in a poor family, out on a farm. We lived with my grandmother. After my grandfather passed away, we moved out to my grandmother's place. And missionary, I was always fascinated with missions. My parents, thank the Lord, raised us in church. And growing up, I was always fascinated with missions. I loved reading, and I read every book in the house at least once, and many of those were biographies, autobiographies of missionaries. And growing up, those were my heroes. I wanted, I imagined and fantasized about going to the mission field, being a missionary. But living from a poorer family, that was impossible. How would I ever finance any of those trips or anything like that? And Loriann's from Redding, so...
Yes, I was born and raised here in Redding. I'm very grateful for... My mom is here with us today. My dad was not feeling up to making it today. He just had surgery recently, so he's at home recovering. But very grateful that I was also raised in a Christian home. We were at church every time the doors were open, it seemed, and very involved. And unlike my husband, I did not imagine and fantasize about going on missions. That is something that the Lord changed my heart about. Around 15 years old, I surrendered my life to the Lord and decided, okay, God, I'm going to do whatever you want me to do, go where you want me to go. I did not know what that meant at the time, and it was a very scary step for me. But over the years, the Lord kept putting missions on my heart, and I knew that He wanted me to be involved in missions somehow, some way. So when Joel and I met, we shared with Pastor a little bit about our story, of how we met and how God brought us together. But it was obvious to me that wherever God had called Joel, that's where I was going to go as well. But God also had put that part of the world on my heart, specifically the Eastern European area. And so it's been very amazing and neat to see how the Lord has led us and brought us to where we are right now. I was also part of a big family, but not as big as his family. I'm one of 5. I have 3 brothers and 1 sister. I'm right in the middle. So jokingly, I was kind of one of the forgotten children. Everyone knew my older brother and sister, and then the youngest one. Me and my brother Joe were kind of in between somewhere. But I'm a privilege and a blessing to grow up in a believing family. I am very grateful to my parents for raising me in the church and instilling that need and the importance of walking with the Lord. So, missions-wise, we will continue sharing about our missions.
Just the connection, I'm not sure if maybe it was mentioned already, but Danny is Loriann's cousin.
My cousin Danny, Stacy, my aunt Jerry. This is kind of how we ended up here. We ran into Danny at a festival, and we started talking to him, and he's like, hey, why don't you want to maybe come to my church and share? And we were like, sure. So he kind of brought this connection together, and we were very grateful for that, so thank you.
So, Ukraine, I mean, I know before I went to Ukraine, it was a country that I knew 2 things about. I knew about the Chernobyl disaster in 1986, when the nuclear power plant there in Chernobyl area exploded. One of the reactors exploded, and there was this massive nuclear fallout and cover-up by the Soviet Union. And also they had one very good Olympic gymnast there as well. And so, you know, those were the 2 things. But for me, as well as most Americans, Ukraine was always part of the Soviet Union. That's the Soviet Union, that's Eastern Europe. So when God called us to Ukraine 15 years ago, actually 16, we just celebrated our 15th anniversary of being in Ukraine, and the beginning of this month. It was a whole new idea. I had spent 8 years already in Moscow, Russia, working in an orphanage there. And we opened an office in Ukraine just outside the capital of Kiev. And when I was asked to go down there and staff the office, my answer was, okay, but first I need to get married. I was 26 at the time, going on 27, and I was beginning to understand, the Lord was beginning to show me that he that findeth a wife findeth a good thing. I thought I had a good thing already by being in the Lord's work, by being a missionary, by being serving the Lord, but he showed me that things could get a lot better, and they did. They got a lot better. So 5 months after Loriann and I were married in 2009, we were over in Ukraine, and for Loriann it was a completely new situation, new thing.
Yeah, I had never been to Ukraine before we actually moved there. I had been to Russia twice, helping him with his ministry there with different teams, short-term missions trips there. So I had an idea maybe of like the culture, language, but I had never been to Ukraine before. And we got married in May of 2009, and then November of 2009, we actually moved over there completely. So everything was very new for me, really started from scratch. We didn't know anybody over there. We had no really solid contacts over there. I didn't know the language at all. So it was quite the change for me. Newly married, new country, new language, new everything. So it was difficult. Looking back, going through it, I thought, oh, this isn't hard. This is good. I'm newly married, kind of head in the clouds. But looking back on it, it was very difficult. Just simple things like going to the grocery store, had no idea what I was looking at, didn't know what to buy. Everything's in Ukrainian. I don't know what it is. I didn't know what to buy, what to cook. So I'm very grateful. Joel kind of had a basic understanding of the language, and so he was a huge help for me, just in the basic daily things that you don't really think about sometimes. I know I didn't. Moving to a different country, something that is you have to get used to and figure out what to buy at the store and where to go and all of that, and not knowing the language at all. It was a challenge for sure.
And over the years, so 15 years, the Lord's allowed us to be a part of many different kinds of ministries. We went over there working with a small organization training pastors and church leaders. I was doing most of the logistics at the office, while our director and his wife were doing a lot of the teaching, traveling all over Ukraine and even back into Russia at the beginning. But Loriann and I, because we were centered at the office, the Lord had us find our own ministries, or He brought ministries to us. And over the years, many different ministries. One of our big focuses throughout the time has been summer camps, camps for children, camps for teens, young people. This is a holdover from Soviet times, where during Soviet times, all kids of all ages would be sent away from their homes to camps, to summer camps, during the 3 months when school was out. And this was to occupy time. This was to supposedly give them a more healthy environment outside the cities, in remote places, either by the sea or in the mountains. And so even after communism fell, the church took that and said, well, we're going to keep that going. We're going to keep inviting kids and having these kids camps and youth camps, teen camps. And parents, even of unbelievers, will send their kids because that mentality of, well, it's summer, kids have to go to camp. And these camps can be anywhere from a week to 21 days. And so it's a great evangelistic opportunity to evangelize the unsaved, where their parents are gladly paying and sending the kids, or for the kids to go to camp. So we did many of that. For about 4 years, we had a ministry with the blind. And we were asked to come lead a small English, teach these blind students. It was a group of university students that were all blind. They were studying in a small university that taught therapeutic massage. And the thinking was, these are blind people, they use their hands, their touch, they're more sensitive with other senses, so let's teach them massage. So we came in there and started teaching in English, but we realized that a lot of teaching, when you teach English, is visual, and we had to adapt it to only oral, only by hearing. But it was shortly after we began that we realized that this English club teaching, it wasn't so much that the kids were really hungry to learn English. It was they were more interested in spending time with them, just spending time with them. And so we did that up until the university actually closed, and the kids were scattered back to their homes. But we went there every week, spending time with these young people. We even went out, we went on a 3-day hike into the mountains with them, and each one of the blind students had their own seeing partner or buddy, and we helped them along, and a lot of them did so well. But, working with disabled people really shows you a lot, not just about them, but about yourself, and what God wants to teach you in their dependence, in their, seeing their trust, seeing their absolute blind trust in the one who's leading them. We taught Sunday school in 2016. I became a deacon of a church, one of the large older churches in Kiev. And on the map you can see Kiev is almost in the center of Ukraine. Irpin, this is where we live. This is where our office was. It closed down in 2020. But we live just outside of Kiev. It's not the scale, so we're only about 15 minutes outside of the capital of Kiev. So through the years, many different ministries, many different opportunities. In 2020, in October, I was ordained as one of the pastors of that church. It was never a desire or even a thought of mine to be a pastor. I was always a missionary. That was my calling. God had called me to missions. But in working with this church over the years, we developed such a wonderful relationship and trust with this church that the pastoral staff invited me to join them. And at first I balked. I said, no, I'm not a pastor, I'm a missionary.
And I balked.
And Loriann sometimes still balks. But we saw that again as another way of blessing the Ukrainian people, blessing this church, and helping as we can. Our vision in going over there was to do good unto all men, but especially those of the household of faith, as it says in Galatians. We never had a desire to plant a new church or plant another church. Ukraine is actually the most evangelical country in all of Europe. Even though it's still a small percentage, it's the most evangelical. They have a strong evangelical church in Ukraine. But there was a big push after communism fell at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s. There was a big push by Western churches to go over there, fund new churches, start new churches, and really evangelize. But a lot of that since has pulled out or dropped away. Some of that was because of the revolution in 2014. Some of it was because of the pandemic. And then when this war started in 2022, almost all of Western in-country help left. And so the church was strong, but it was now kind of, I don't want to say forgotten, but put on the back burner. And so we saw our role as partnering with already established churches and aiding them, helping them, teaching where we can, supporting them, being an encouragement to them, showing them that you guys are doing well, you're doing good, let's keep going, and so this morning I want to just read, and I have a slideshow, and there's lots of slides, so we're gonna fly through some of these. But this morning, God has shown me, and I have many heroes in the scriptures, but there's a story in the end of Deuteronomy and the beginning of the book of Joshua where God 6 times, through Moses, through the children of Israel, and then he himself, tells Joshua, be strong and of good courage. And he tells it to him over. And at first you're like, okay, God is just reminding this man to be strong and of good courage. But if we remember, Joshua was already a very courageous, a very brave, a very strong leader. He was Moses' general. He led the people of Israel into battle over and over and over again as they prepared to go into the promised land. But God wanted to remind even Joshua, be strong and of good courage. Be strong and of good courage. And in 2022, when this war started, Loriann and I came back from the States the end of January of that year, and there was all this news, all this buzz of the Russians are massing troops on the border with Ukraine, they're about to invade Ukraine, and this was one of the passages that God reminded us over and over again. Be strong and of good courage. Be strong and of good courage. I think all of us would admit to having some kind of fears. There's some things that we fear, and it can be many different things. But God, in our fears, He speaks to us, reminding us, be strong and of good courage. Just as a visual, again, this is the country of Ukraine. These are where in 2022, February of 2022, where Russia invaded from. Down here you have the Odessa area. Down here, this is Crimea. The Russians had already occupied this peninsula. Here, they had occupied some of this area here. But in February, they invaded from three sides of Ukraine. We had always, from 2014, when there was the invasion of this part of Ukraine, here we were, way over here on the other side of the capital, and our thought was, we're pretty far. We're pretty far from this over here. It's about a 9 to 12 hour drive, depending on where you go. Over here, and so even in February, when all of this news and all of this talking was going on about Ukraine's going to be invaded, we never imagined that our little town of Irpin was 12 miles away from a military airport where the Russians would land first. And they landed there the morning of the 24th in February, and that's the day that I think we would say our lives changed. Our lives changed forever. We were there. We actually heard that the Russians had invaded, not from anybody in country, but from my brother here in California. He called me early in the morning, said, "Joel, have you heard what's going on? The Russians invaded." I said, "We haven't heard anything. Everything's okay here." But it was shortly after that we could hear the faint popping. Again, it was very faint. We actually drove into Kiev to pick up some of our friends, drove them back to Irpin, thinking, we'll keep them here for the weekend, and then they can go back to Kiev. And little did we know that weekend is still going on. So we went back to Irpin, and we're there overnight. We spent the part of the night in an underground shelter because the explosions were getting closer, getting louder. And we spent it in that underground shelter with neighbors that were living nearby, our landlord who lives right behind us. And the next day we decided we need to leave Irpin. We need to leave and leave. There were so many people, just a massive amount of people fleeing this area, heading over to Europe or down to Romania. As God has done many times in our ministry, He took us from Irpin, not to the east, not to the west, but we actually traveled over here to central Ukraine, to Cherkasy area, where our friends' parents were. And our friends' parents basically live in the middle of nowhere in the very heart of Ukraine. And they were saying, it's completely calm here, there's nothing going on here, it's safe here. So we took our friends there, and we were there for 10 days. And after that, God led us to leave them there. We felt like God had something more for us than simply staying safe or simply being out of everything. And so we drove over to Romania with the plan to start bringing humanitarian aid back into Ukraine. And we were in Romania for 10 days and then began shuttling humanitarian aid. Through that time, this is as Americans, we never would have thought that we would have been involved or in the middle of any sort of warfare. War for us is always something on TV. It's something in Africa, it's something in Asia, it's something always over there, somewhere over there. And yet God put us there. And one of our prayers in going to Ukraine had always been, God, we want to be with the people. We want to identify with the people. And this was God, as if God was saying, okay, if that's your desire, then I want you to really identify with the people. And so not only were we refugees, not only did we flee with all the other Ukrainians, but when we went over to Romania, we sat for 12 hours on the Romanian, 13 hours on the Romanian or Ukrainian-Romanian border trying to cross over. We sat in this long, long line that was literally crawling to the border. And that whole time there was a single young man in the car behind us, also trying to go over, and I talked a lot with that young man, and he was, we would call an emotional wreck. He was just weeping and crying as we're just crawling, because after moving the car 30 feet, or 10 feet at sometimes, then you'd stop and you'd sit there for 40 minutes, an hour. And so we would get out of the car and we would talk with those around us, and this young man had already sent his wife and newborn baby into Romania. He hadn't been allowed to cross because he was of a military age, but he had gotten a pass from a doctor saying that he could cross, and so he was going to try again. And he was just weeping, saying, I don't know if that's the last time I will see my wife and my child. And just talking with him, praying with him, being with him, again, identifying with the Ukrainians. When we finally crossed the border at 1:30 in the morning, most things are shut down. Where are we going to go? The place where we were going in Romania was still 5 hours away by car. And so we actually spent that first night in Romania in a refugee camp. And being in a refugee camp is an interesting thing. This was a very large gymnasium with cots on the floor everywhere. And I remember, some of the lights were on all night as people continued to come in. And so you slept fitfully. But I remember waking up one time and looking in the corner at the far wall, and it looked like there was somebody just staring at me. Okay, this is creepy. This is weird. Will that person just go to sleep? It wasn't until the next morning that I realized that it was a dummy that they used for boxing practice. He was just standing there against the wall. Okay. But even there at the refugee center, we were able to translate because we knew English. Romanians knew English, but not Ukrainian or Russian. Whereas we knew Russian, and so we could translate for the Romanians to the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians used us to translate from Ukrainian or Russian back to English for the Romanians. And so we were there for most of the morning, afternoon, and then we finally left. But through all of this, God is showing us, I'm still in control. I'm still in control. I still have you in my hands. I still have you in my hands. It was 3.5 months later that we were able to go back to Irpin. We didn't know. We had heard no news. The Ukrainians had occupied almost all of Irpin and up to the Belarusian border, and then over here as well. Much of this was occupied. We knew that Russians were in Irpin, but we didn't know, and there was fierce fighting going on in Irpin as well. After a month, the Russians dropped back, fled, were driven back out of Irpin and that area, but we still had to wait because there was no power, no water, no electricity, no heating in Irpin, and the government there in Irpin was telling its people, don't come back yet, don't come back yet. So when we came back 3.5 months later, we didn't know what to expect. Was our home there? What was it like? Was it damaged? We had heard many reports of large-scale damage. And I want to show you some of the damage in Irpin that we came back and saw. This is, again, 3.5 months later. 2 months, sorry. 2 months later. This was our office. We rented a room in another Christian organization. We rented the front room. This was our office. Come to find out, the Russians had actually used this as a base. There was a tank. There's a garage here underground. It drive down. They had parked a tank inside of here. There were tank tracks all through here. So this was actually hit by Ukrainian army, but this was our former office. Some of the apartment buildings in this is just right across the street from our office building. Both of these buildings, there was a home here. This is a home of some friends of ours, and this home that was completely destroyed. We actually were driving by this home. Loriann's good friend and her family lived here. We drove by and saw that it had been hit, and we pulled up to take a few pictures, and out comes Loriann's friend's husband walking out. They had been in there. We were actually able to help them clean up a little bit there. As you can see, the rock came down and hit the street and sprayed debris back up. It drove this roof, it actually lifted this roof up and twisted it just enough to completely condemn the whole house. This is 2 blocks away from our home. You can see where mortars had hit. We had passed, there's a gas station, the mangled remains of a gas station. We had passed this gas station when we left Irpin at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. At about 7 or 8 o'clock that night, this gas station was hit and destroyed. And this was the last remaining outlet out of Irpin. And so we just see God's timing in bringing us out of Irpin. This is a very famous bridge now. This is where the Ukrainians blew this bridge up to prevent Russians from advancing on Kiev. But you probably have seen pictures of refugees fleeing under this bridge on makeshift little walkways, fleeing under that bridge. That is half a mile from our home. In the morning of the second day, we heard the explosion, the big explosion from that bridge being blown. This is a bird's eye view of parts of Ukraine, or parts of Kiev, or Irpin, excuse me, Irpin. This is our town. This is parts of Irpin. Almost every home is destroyed. And so we are seeing this on the 2 months before. We're seeing reports of this. This is Irpin, and we have no idea what God, what our home is like, what we will find when we come home. So this is a map of Irpin. This is a map of our city. All of these dots are places of destruction, places where things have been hit. If you look down here, this is the neighborhood where we live. And throughout Irpin, there's just destruction and places that have been burned out, bombed out, and yet we can see that there's nothing in this neighborhood. And actually, that's not a true, come to find out later, that's not a true map, because the neighbor across the street from our house actually had a mortar fall through their roof but did not explode. Right across the street from our home. But when we came home, this is what we found. We walked through the gate not knowing, we were ready to accept anything, not knowing, and yet nothing was touched. No windows were broken. There were wide reports of windows being blown out, not from any armament, any piece of bomb or shrapnel or anything, but from explosion reverberations. But there was nothing. Nothing had been, even inside, everything was just as we had left it. There was still food on the table. We had blown up an air mattress for our friends, thinking that they were going to stay with us. The air mattress was still fully blown, leaning against the wall. We like to say we have the world's best air mattress because even overnight those things live there. This is fully blown, just 2 months later. It was an absolute miracle. It was as if God just put his hand over this home, even with us not there. We had given it to him, saying, God, it's yours. You do whatever you want. And yet he left it just like it is for us. Some of our friends were not so fortunate. These people fled their home only hours before their home was hit and exploded or burned. The months after the beginning of the war, God took us through many parts of Ukraine and then into Europe, and had us minister to friends and to people that we didn't know. This was a lady that we stayed at when we first went to the middle area of Ukraine. A lady, she had broken her hand like 5 days, a week before we got there. An older grandmother from the local church there, and she didn't know how she would manage. And God brought us there to help her. This is the first time Loriann had ever butchered a chicken. New things. These were friends that we met in Kharkov. This was later on, but that we met in Kharkov, living only about 50 miles from the Russian border. Down when we were living in southern part of Ukraine, those first months, we asked, how can we help? Where can we help? And one of the local pastors pointed us to this school that was housing over 200 refugees. And they were feeding these refugees every day, 3 meals a day. And he said, the cook there is a great lady. Go there and see what you can do. And so we took a couple of shipments of food to her. She was so grateful. And at Easter, we bought these Easter breads and gave them to her to hand out to each of the families. Just different things that God had us, that he opened the door for us to be active, even though we weren't at home, even though we didn't actually during this time know where our home was. When we went into Europe, our vision was to visit friends that had fled into Europe. And usually that was either mothers and children or families where there's 3 or more children, because the husbands could then leave the country if they had 3 or more children. And so we were able to visit. We did 2 tours through Europe, visiting families in Germany and Poland, Czech Republic. An interesting time. And all of them were so grateful. You haven't forgotten us. You haven't. Because there was a stigma attached to refugees who had fled by those still in the country. Oh, you guys couldn't trust the Lord. Or you guys, we're here and you guys are in a better place, or you imagine, you think you're in a better place. And so there was kind of this stigma that you guys left, so you guys are all good, you guys are fine. There was guilt on their part by, well, we've left, but we have family or we have friends that are still in the middle of it. Either they can't leave or they don't want to. So being there was a reassurance for them that we haven't forgotten them, we still love them, but also for the people in Ukraine that these are still our church members. These are still our friends. These are still our people. Like I said, we did do humanitarian aid as well, buying products, not only for people, but also for the Army. Those first weeks and months of the war, the Ukrainian Army was very under equipped, and so taking food and things, quick meals to them. We took some, as it got closer to the winter of that first year, we took some stoves to families in need. Maybe their home had been destroyed, or they were without heating or power in their homes. There was also a lot of aid, and as you see in these boxes, it's U.S. aid. There was also a lot of aid coming into the country, and so our church became a center where aid would come in, and then we would hand out. We would pass out, and through this, you know, the big American flag on the side of the box. Our people, while relationship with Americans was always good, this just expanded it, and it became even a deeper love for Americans by the Ukrainians. You know, seeing how much America is across the ocean, and yet it's sending all of this aid to us. As the time went on, we came back to our home. This is in Irpin. This is a hospital. We did a outreach to this hospital in Kiev. This is in the center of Kiev. This is where children are there long term. This little girl has been in this hospital. It's a diabetic. Yeah? They're on dialysis, yes. This little girl is an orphan. She's been in this hospital for 9 years. There was another boy that had been in there for 12 years, also didn't have any parents. And so these kids were there long term. We visited them, sadly, only about a month and a half later. That very building, that very wing of the hospital where we were, where we visited those kids, was hit by a Russian rocket. Thankfully, they had enough warning where they were able to get all of the kids out. None of the kids that we visited were there. They were either in the bomb shelter down below. But that building was hit. And just, it brings home where and how close, you know, this war, while most of it is still on the eastern side, through the Russian attacks, through all of this, it's still very much a nationwide war. These are outreaches that we did to a village up north near the Russian border, passing out backpacks to them sent over by Americans. There's a teen camp that we did this summer with a group of my sisters here, and there was 5 Americans that came over. We've seen how God has used the church in Ukraine. As I said, it was a strong church, but for many years after communism, it was an inward-looking church. And God used this war to open the eyes of the church to, okay, we need to do something. There's physical needs that need to be met. And so many of these churches, many of the churches across Ukraine became centers of humanitarian support, became centers of giving out aid, feeding those in need, clothing those in need. And the community has seen that the church, the evangelical church, did not run, has not, and really cares for them. And it has opened up the doors. People are coming to church that would have never come to church before. But because of the hands-on work of the church there, they are much more open to what God is doing. This is a teen camp we did this summer with kids from our church and unbelievers as well. It's the first time we had 2 boys repent, 2 boys pray to receive Jesus, and I was even able to baptize one of the boys, one of the young guys that has been in our youth or our teen group for a number of years. So God has us very active, and over, even during times where at night we lay in bed and we can hear the rocket or the drone whistle overhead. Be strong and of good courage. And there's a reason why we can be strong. There's a reason why Loriann and I can still be there, even in the midst of all the destruction and all of the war and the ugliness, is because when we read those verses about Jesus, or about God telling Joshua to be strong and have good courage, there's a reason why he tells him that. In Deuteronomy 31:6, he says, "Be strong and of good courage, fear not, nor be afraid of them, for the Lord thy God, he it is that goes with you. He will not fail you or forsake you." The Lord thy God is with you wherever you go. Pastor said that the safest, best place to be is with the Lord. We like to say the safest place to be is in the center of God's will. And this whole time, we have been assured that our place is in this, and the center of God's will for us is in Ukraine with the people. He's allowed us to identify with them, and it's opened up doors that we would have never imagined that God would use. It was our church camp. These 5 men in the back who are standing are in the military. They were drafted or went into the military after the war began. Us that are sitting are the pastoral team. But we are aiding and reaching out and helping them as we can. This guy, he's one of our cooks in our church. But he has been drafted into the army. Slavic continues to write me, and he's writing me as he's on the front lines, but he's not writing about himself or asking for prayer for himself. He's writing and asking about Dad Hodgson. How's his health? How is his surgery? What's going on? Is God answering prayer and just answering him, communicating with him, and also assuring him that we are praying for him, we're supporting him, we're with him as he's there in dangerous places. We would ask that you would continue to pray for Ukraine. I know that sometimes the information here is less to non-existent, or it's twisted in some ways. But even if you're not praying for the politics and the politicians in Ukraine, you can still be praying for the people, because the people there are suffering. And just 5 ways to pray for Ukraine. Pray for peace. Pray for peace in that country, that the war would end. Pray for unity. There are still factions in Ukraine that would like things done differently, or think that things that can be done better this way or that way. Pray for the church, that it would continue to be a light to the community. Pray for economic stability. Their currency has fallen drastically because of this war, and so it's very hard but prices have risen. And then pray for revival. I have said, and I've said this to Ukrainians, the worst thing that could happen is for Ukraine to once again have peace, but for the people of Ukraine not to find the Prince of Peace. Because if you don't have the Prince of Peace, then you're not going to have peace in your heart. And for Ukrainians, the focus is, and the desire, and we desire it as well, that there would be physical, lasting peace in Ukraine. But most of all, pray that even through this war, even despite this war, people would find the Lord, and that they would find the Prince of Peace. I know our time is up. I've spent too much time. I can do that. But thank you so much. I was supposed to allow time for questions, but I didn't do that. I apologize. Thank you all very much for your attention. Thank you for your prayers. We do have some prayer cards. If you would like to get our newsletters, we'd love to add you to our newsletter list. Pastor?
Great, thank you for coming and sharing. And we're all headed upstairs.
We're headed upstairs. Lord bless you.